Sand! Too much sand! Yeah, okay. So, anyways, welcome back to my Star Wars Saga review miniseries. And we're on episode 2 now, Attack of the Clones. And just like with all of these reviews we're going to do, I go back, I rewatch the episode we're reviewing before giving my review. By the way, I watched Attack of the Clones in theaters. Let's see, back in 2002. Wow, that was a while back. And I think I watched it at least twice. And overall, I enjoyed it. I found it very entertaining. And I think I will probably end up ranking it a little bit lower than Phantom Menace. But let's go ahead and get into it. By the way, Akeem was complaining that I wasn't wearing my Jedi robe in the first review. I do sincerely apologize, Akeem. And, got it back on. I liked wearing it whenever we were doing some Star Wars Let's Play over on the gaming channel. So I think it makes sense. But anyways, thank you for the suggestion, Akeem. Alright, so yeah, Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. And it came out once again in 2002. It was written by George Lucas along with Jonathan Hales. So a lot of us were under the assumption that it was just George Lucas that wrote and directed it. But no, he did have some help in the writing aspect of Attack of the Clones with Jonathan Hales. But George Lucas did once again direct Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. The score, once more, by the extremely talented John Williams. Attack of the Clones is set 10 years after the events of Phantom Menace. And this is the first thing that I will say Lucas gets right that Rian Johnson got wrong. You know, you allow time to breathe between the two episodes. You know, episode 1 to episode 2, a nice 10-year period so that the characters could grow, be fleshed out a little bit. That didn't exactly happen with The Last Jedi, but we'll get to The Last Jedi eventually. Rian Johnson. You have my word on that. So, Palpatine has been Supreme Chancellor for a few years. Padme's now a senator of Naboo, so she eventually became the senator, you know, once her duties as queen was over. By the way, the queens get elected. They're not lifelong positions on Naboo, so Padme's now queen. And Obi-Wan Kenobi is a Jedi Knight. He's also the master of Anakin Skywalker, who's been his apprentice for the past 10 years. So they've obviously have built up that relationship. And there are now several systems within the Galactic Republic that are threatening to leave and form their own faction under the Separatist movement, with the mysterious former Jedi known as Count Dooku, played by the late, great Christopher Lee, who had an outstanding performance as Count Dooku in both Episode 2 as well as Episode 3, which we will be reviewing next. And Nute Gunray still out there. He's part of the Separatist faction, along with the Bank Clan, the Techno Union, a few others as well, and several star systems. And Nute Gunray, obviously, he wants revenge for Padme's part in what she did to him, humiliating him a decade prior, has put a price on her head, and it leads to a near assassination attempt when she returns to Coruscant for an important vote regarding the creation of an army of the Republic. She and her committee are against the army, but at the same time, events force Padme to go under the protection of the Jedi at the behest of Chancellor Palpatine. And the two Jedi that get assigned to protect her are, of course, Jedi Knight Obi-Wan Kenobi and his apprentice, Anakin Skywalker. And as some of you know, Anakin and Padme kind of had a little, I don't know if you could call it a spark at the time, because obviously Anakin is younger than Padme. But you could tell that there was something there between the two. And, you know, a caring thing, right? They obviously grew to care for each other whenever they first met on Tatooine all the way to Coruscant and back to Naboo. So Anakin obviously very excited to see Padme again. And Obi-Wan, glad to see Jar Jar, who's mellowed out a little bit. And I think a lot of that was because of the fan backlash. I think Lucas decided to, just calm Jar Jar down a little bit. But it also makes sense that you would go from Jar Jar being a little bit younger, a little bit more clumsy, to becoming a general in the Grand Army of the Gungans, to being a hero, and becoming very well respected, and of course a representative. And obviously he would have, over a 10-year period, had grown as a character. So it does make sense that over the time span these characters have changed. The most obvious one would be Anakin, who went from a little boy to, I would say, a guy in his late teens. Obviously very powerful in the Force, but still has a lot of flaws. And that's one thing I like about Anakin. He is not a Mary Sue, and it's pretty apparent from the beginning that he's far from perfect. Despite how powerful he may be, despite how everyone talks about how he's the chosen one, he's supposed to bring balance to the Force, he obviously is flawed. And that's important to any character, whether it's a hero, an anti-hero, or a villain. And that's a big reason why a lot of fans do not like Mary Sues. And a Mary Sue doesn't have to be a female character. That's just for any character, male or female, that is the bestest ever and practically perfect in every way and has no flaws. You have to have flaws for a character. Things for them to overcome, weaknesses, issues, you get the idea. And I would say that Anakin definitely has issues in Episode 2. And so there are bounty hunters trying to kill Padme. And one of the bounty hunters is caught by Anakin and Obi-Wan, Jango Fett, which is the father of Boba Fett. He kills the bounty hunter. He flees Coruscant, leading the Jedi to send Obi-Wan after the bounty hunter and to Kamino. And then Anakin is, of course, assigned to protect Padme. And they go in secret to Naboo because obviously there's still a threat on Padme's life. Anakin assigned to protect her along with R2. And while on Naboo, they fall in love, even though they both realize that they can't really be together because Anakin's a Jedi. I mean, he's young, and he doesn't care about the rules. He just wants to be Padme. Padme, a little bit more mature than Anakin. She does have feelings for him, but she's fighting it a lot harder than he is. But she also puts duty before their feelings, and so for a time, they both decide that it's for the best to focus on, the bigger issues. So during all this, Anakin's been having nightmares about his mom being captured and tortured. And finally it gets so bad to where Padme agrees to go with him back to Tatooine. Eventually they meet the Lars, Klieg, along with his son Owen, and Owen's girlfriend Beru. And of course, according to Watto, he freed Shmi, Anakin's mom, and married her. And unfortunately, for like a month, Shmi's been missing. And this is, I guess, where the nightmares started for Anakin. Turns out she was captured by Tusken Raiders, and they were unable to rescue her. And so Anakin, while him and Padme are at the Lars farm, Padme is left behind as Anakin goes off to rescue his mom. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan has discovered, the clone world where the clones are being built. He's encountered Jango Fett and Boba Fett. And, of course, several little fights between them break out, all the way to Geonosis, where Obi-Wan discovers the secret separatist droid army being built, assembled under Count Dooku. And, of course, Obi-Wan reports all this back to Anakin and Padme, but he's captured by Dooku. Dooku then informs Obi-Wan that the mysterious Darth Sidious is behind all this, and, Count Dooku's trying to encourage and sway Obi-Wan to join him because, turns out, Qui-Gon Jinn was the apprentice of Count Dooku. So there's obviously a father-son relationship between Count Dooku and Qui-Gon Jinn, which would, I guess, give kind of a grandfather-grandson relationship between Dooku and Obi-Wan, even though Obi-Wan and Dooku never crossed paths until this point. But Obi-Wan refuses to join Dooku, so ultimately they're going to attempt to execute Obi-Wan Kenobi. Meanwhile, you have Anakin, hot, going across the plains and deserts of Tatooine on a speeder bike, looking for the location of the Tusken Raiders that captured his mom. He finds his mom. She's clearly been tortured over a month, probably malnourished and lack of water, and she's literally dying. So she gets to spend her final moments with her son, telling him that she loves him, that she's proud of him. But unfortunately, she dies in his arms. And of course, Anakin does kind of sort of have a dark side already. And, well, the Tusken Raiders end up getting on the receiving end of Anakin's anger. And, of course, whenever he comes back with Shmi's body, they bury her. And then, he confesses to Padme what he did. And, that would kind of creep out some people, but I guess Padme kind of understood. It was his mom after all, and he is a Jedi. He's very powerful, and he got pissed, and so he did what he had to do. So they get an alert that all this is happening, and that this is when they send the transmission from Obi-Wan on Geonosis to Coruscant, and by now, Palpatine has managed to convince everybody to go along with the emergency powers. In fact, Representative Binks is the one who encourages the Senate to vote on emergency powers so that Palpatine can officially create an army of the Republic. The irony is Padme was against an army of the Republic, but Jar Jar Binks, who's supposed to be representing on her behalf, is the one that's swayed and manipulated in order to giving Palpatine the power. Of course, the Senate does vote in favor of it, so it's not just on Binks. It's on all the senators that voted to give Palpatine those emergency powers, so that this mysterious clone army created, I guess, ordered by Sifo Dyas on Kamino, before he was killed 10 years ago, can now be quickly put together and sent off to Geonosis under the command of Yoda. Meanwhile, Mace Windu assembles whatever Jedi he can get his hands on in order to mount a rescue operation on Geonosis to rescue Obi-Wan Kenobi. Meanwhile, you have Anakin and Padme also heading to Geonosis along with R2-D2 and C-3PO. They get captured and they get nearly executed, but before they're about to be executed, Padme finally confesses to Anakin that she loves him as well, and that since they're both about to be destroyed, it doesn't matter because, hey, we're not going to survive anyways. I might as well tell you how I feel, so they have a moment together. Of course, they all survive. An epic, Jedi droid battle breaks out. It's pretty badass. You have Mace Windu out there fighting Jango. You have, so much, lightsabering going on in droids. It's an epic fight, okay? It's epic. And then, of course, Yoda shows up with the clone army, and then it gets even more epic, and, it really is an awesome climax as the Clone Wars begins on Kamino, and, Dooku attempts to escape along with most of the droid army, but then there's a final fight between Dooku as well as Obi-Wan and Anakin, who have tracked him down. Unfortunately, Anakin and Obi-Wan get their asses kicked by Dooku, and Anakin kind of sort of loses an arm and gets electrocuted, but then Yoda shows up, and then we see how badass of a lightsaber duelist Yoda is, and whenever I saw that scene, I was, really impressed. I'm like, hell yeah, Yoda's showing how badass he truly is. And so ultimately, Dooku manages to escape, and so the Clone Wars has begun. And Dooku also manages to escape with plans for the Death Star, which I always had an issue with. I didn't really feel like it was necessary to Easter egg in the Death Star plans and have it to where the Geonosians were the ones that came up with the blueprints for it. So I felt like that was kind of pointless. It wasn't really necessary. We'll get to some more unnecessary things in a bit. But so, he makes it back to Coruscant, Dooku. I guess at the Sith Temple on the outskirts, the main capital of Coruscant, where Darth Sidious is waiting for him, and Dooku tells him the good news that the war has begun, so everything's proceeding according to plan. The Clone Wars has begun. The Grand Army is sitting off in their acclimator ships along with Jedi generals to go fight the droid armies across the stars. And of course, little does everybody realize that Anakin and Padme, who Anakin now has a robot arm, have returned to Naboo, and they are secretly wed. So overall, I mean, it's considered by many at the time, when it came out in 2002, to have been the worst Star Wars film. And at the time, I would have agreed with that. But it still was entertaining. And, you know, it still was action-packed. It still had a lot to offer, despite its flaws, which we'll definitely get into. But it's definitely not as good as Episode 1 or 3. But at the same time, along with the Clone Wars TV series, it definitely does bridge between Episodes 1 and 3 and helps flesh out the prequels as a whole. So Episode 1, Episode 2, Clone Wars TV series, along with Episode 3, overall makes the prequel era a very, exciting part of the Star Wars universe. So despite its issues, it's enjoyable to watch, and I enjoyed going back and rewatching it. And for the most part, I had a good time watching it. And by the way, I just want to mention some of the actors and actresses involved. Not all of them, but credit to Ewan McGregor, Obi-Wan Kenobi, does a great performance. Natalie Portman, fantastic as Padme. Hayden Christensen as Anakin Skywalker. Now, he catches a lot of flack, but I don't entirely blame Hayden. I blame the writing. I blame the terrible dialogue that George Lucas and Jonathan Hales came up for him. Now, as I mentioned before, George Lucas is a visionary. He's a great director, but writing dialogue and romance have always seemed to be kind of problematic for George Lucas. And even though he had a writing partner on this, there are moments that they could have tweaked when it came to Anakin's dialogue and even his character altogether to make him maybe just a little bit more likable. Ian McDiarmid, awesome as Palpatine, as always. He always puts on a great performance. And, of course, the late, great Christopher Lee, who's great in everything he's been in, as far as I remember from one of the Bond films, Lord of the Rings, to Episode 2 or 3 of Star Wars, and many more movies that he has been in. So another legend in Christopher Lee. Frank Oz back as Yoda, and we got CGI Yoda this time. It looks way better than Puppet Yoda, as I mentioned in Episode 1. One of the issues I had with the original version of Episode 1, that Puppet just didn't feel like Yoda. But ironically, when they went back and they CGI'd Yoda in Episode 1, it looked a lot more like Yoda. And of course, the badass himself, Samuel Jackson. We get a lot more screen time with him as Mace Windu, and that was epic as well. Let's see, Anthony Daniels, Kenny Baker reprised their roles as C-3PO and R2-D2. Ahmad Best also had a few moments as Jar Jar, a more mature Jar Jar. And, of course, we had some moments with Jimmy Smits, who plays Bail Organa, kind of an important character in Star Wars. And then Jango Fett, played by Tamora Morrison. He also plays the clones, because the clones are cloned of Jango. So, yeah. At the time, it was considered to be the worst Star Wars film. And I would agree with that, but I didn't walk out of the theater the 2 or 3 times I watched it hating Attack of the Clones. I didn't find it as good as the original trilogy, or not as good as Phantom Menace, but it was enjoyable enough to where I felt like going back and watching it at least 2 or 3 more times. I forgot how many times I went to watch it exactly. I think it was maybe at least twice, but still enjoyed it. And it still left me looking forward to the epic conclusion in Episode 3. It didn't leave me angry and ticked off at George Lucas and like, that's it, I'm done. I have no interest in watching Episode 3. Screw Star Wars. I didn't feel that way. It left a lot to be desired, but like I said. So, strong action. Lots of lightsaber battles, which was awesome. Of course, mostly everything was entertaining in the movie from start to finish. Now, like I mentioned, the romance between Anakin and Padme could have been worked a little bit better. It was necessary, and there definitely are moments where you see chemistry between Hayden and Natalie Portman. But like I said, there's dialogue that could have been fleshed out and retwigged and we reworked a little bit better. And there's also moments that don't really work at all, like a little confrontation between him and Padme when they're talking to the Queen on Naboo. It wasn't necessary. There's a moment whenever he's telling her how he has to go to Tatooine, and Padme has agreed to go, and then they should have cut the scene right there, or else had him just... Like, there are scenes where they could have just had him have, like, an emotional response instead of, like, the dialogue, because the dialogue wasn't the best for Anakin in Episode 2. There were moments, but there's also some meme-worthy stuff, like his San monologue. But, at the same time, Natalie Portman looked great in Episode 2, I'm just saying. So, despite the fact that was probably the weaker part of Episode 2, it still held up a little bit. You know, you could tell that there was definitely the potential. Plus the score, the romance score, I forgot exactly what it's called, you know, between Anakin and Padme, written before, like the London Symphony Orchestra under John Williams. Great. Fantastic. But that's probably like the real weak point. So a little bit of dialogue tweaking would have improved that. Plus, I really, ever since the first watching of Episode 2, I really wanted to see the full fight between Anakin and the Tusken Raiders. I wanted to see him just wreck them all. I wanted to see him destroy them all. Not just the men, but the women and the children. I wanted to see it, but we were denied it. I mean, they show that chase scene through Coruscant. By the way, I mean, I like the fact we actually get more time on Coruscant, you know, the capital of the Republic. That was cool, because we got a little bit of time in Episode 1. Not as much, but we got a little bit more in Episode 2, so I also like that as well. And once again, similar to Episode 1, there are definitely moments where the CGI holds up pretty well, and then there are moments where it doesn't. But like I mentioned, overall, I enjoyed rewatching Episode 2. It's been a while. And how I would rank Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, on my list of, you know, first to worst, is I'm going to put it down at 7. Rank 7. I definitely think that Phantom Menace is better, but I do not consider Attack of the Clones to be the worst of the 9 Star Wars saga films. So there you go, my review of Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. And I'm very much looking forward to my next review, which will be Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, which is most of our favorites from the prequel era. And like I said, overall, when you put them together, Episode 1, 2, Clone Wars, and Episode 3, for the most part, they fit together rather nicely. A complete story arc from start to finish. So kudos to George Lucas for his definitive vision when it comes to the prequel trilogy era, along with the Clone Wars. And yeah, so that's pretty much all I've got to say about Episode 2. I'm curious about your thoughts, your views, and opinions regarding Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Did you love it? Did you hate it? And how would you rank it on your list between best or worst Star Wars movie when you take the 9 saga films? Your thoughts, your views, and opinions regarding Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, welcome below in the comments section.